Take her out of my sight!
The royal hall froze. A pregnant maid stood trembling in the center of the grand palace floor, while nobles whispered, laughed, and pointed fingers at her like she was nothing.
I said I do not know this child!
King Tristan Evermont roared, slamming his golden cup onto the table so hard it shattered. Amelia Rowan flinched.
Tristan, please. It is your child.
The entire hall burst into laughter.
A maid dares claim the king?
She wants the crown through a pregnancy? Disgusting.
Look at her, trembling like a leaf.
Then came the voice that made everything worse. Lady Arabella Crown stepped forward, smiling.
She should be punished for treason, Your Majesty. A servant trying to attach herself to the royal bloodline. How pathetic.
How pathetic. Amelia turned to her desperately.
You know I am telling the truth.
But the king didn't even look at her. His voice turned ice cold.
Throw her out.
Silence. Amelia froze.
My king, please believe me.
Two guards grabbed
On my
her
command,
instantly.
throw this
She
wretched
screamed
maid
as they
out
dragged her
now.
across the marble
No,
floor
please,
while everyone
no.
watched. And the king turned away, did not stop them, did not look back. Just like that, the woman carrying his unborn heirs was thrown out into nothing. But what King Tristan never knew was that this decision would destroy his entire kingdom. Because she wasn't just carrying a child, she was carrying his twins. And when the truth returns, the palace will fall. Comment justice if you want Amelia to get her revenge. The palace did not return to normal after Amelia was taken away. It only pretended to. Servants moved through the corridors in silence, cleaning the marble floors where she had been dragged earlier. Every trace of her presence was erased quickly, almost nervously, as if the palace itself feared what it had done. Even the scent of spilled wine near the banquet hall had been scrubbed away. Yet something heavier remained in the air, discomfort, unease, and unspoken guilt. King Tristan Evermont had not left his private chamber since the incident. The heavy wooden doors remained shut, guarded on both sides. Inside, the room was dim despite the rows of golden lamps fixed along the walls. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting long shadows across the polished floor. On his desk lay scattered papers, some half-written, some untouched. None mattered. He stood near the tall window, staring at the palace grounds below. The gardens were still lit with decorative lanterns left from the birthday celebration. The music had stopped hours ago, yet echoes of laughter from earlier still lingered in his mind, twisted now into something unpleasant. He kept seeing her face, not the moment she was dragged out, not the accusations, but the way she had looked at him when she said it. "I am carrying your child." Those words refused to leave him. He tightened his jaw and turned away from the window as if distance could erase memory. A glass of untouched wine sat on a side table. He picked it up, hesitated, then set it down again without drinking. His hand lingered there for a moment before curling into a fist. A knock came at the door. "Your Majesty," Lord Matthias Grey called carefully. Tristan did not answer immediately. After a pause, he said, "Speak." The door opened slightly, and Matthias entered. He did not step fully inside, as if uncertain of the king's mood.
Your Majesty. Speak. The council is unsettled. Nobles are demanding clarification. The incident has already spread beyond the palace.
Tristan finally turned, his expression sharp but controlled.
Let them talk.
Matthias studied him briefly before continuing.
It is not just talk anymore. Some are questioning whether the removal of the maid was justified.
The word lingered in the room. Tristan's eyes narrowed.
She lied.
She lied. There was no hesitation in his voice, but something about the firmness felt rehearsed, not certain. Matthias lowered his gaze slightly.
There is no evidence of that yet, Your Majesty.
A heavy silence followed. Tristan walked past him toward the desk, stopping beside a sealed report placed earlier by palace officials. Without opening it, he spoke again.
A servant does not carry royal blood.
His tone was colder now, as if repeating a law rather than expressing belief. Matthias did not respond immediately. Instead, he chose his words carefully.
The palace acted quickly. Perhaps too quickly.
Tristan's hand rested on the edge of the desk, his fingers pressed into the wood, almost as if grounding himself.
She attempted to shame the crown in front of the entire kingdom. Very well, Your Majesty,
he said. But even as he said it, he remembered her voice breaking when she said his name. Not loud, not dramatic, just desperate. Matthias bowed his head slightly. Very well, Your Majesty. He hesitated before adding, but the people will continue to speak, especially if the truth is unclear. Tristan's gaze hardened. There is no truth to uncover. Matthias held his silence, then bowed and left the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The chamber became still again. Tristan finally opened the sealed report. His eyes scanned the official statement quickly. False pregnancy claim, attempted manipulation of royal authority, removal approved. The words were clean, too clean, written like something easy to dismiss. He stared at the signature at the bottom. His own authority was not directly attached, but everything in the palace always returned to him eventually. That was how power worked. Nothing escaped it. He closed the document slowly. For a moment, he just stood there, listening to the silence of his chamber. It was not peaceful. It felt heavy, like the air itself had changed. Outside, in the distant servants' quarters, Amelia's name was still being whispered. Not loudly, never loudly, only in fragments. She was crying. She looked sick. Do you think she was telling the truth? No one agreed on the answer, and that uncertainty spread fear more than certainty ever could. Far beyond the palace walls, under a narrow overhang near the outer road, Amelia Rowan lay unconscious on the cold ground. Her body barely moved except for shallow breathing. The earlier strength that had carried her through humiliation had collapsed into exhaustion. Her hand rested near her stomach without conscious thought, as if even in unconsciousness she was still protecting what she had been denied the chance to say properly. The night air around her was still, broken only by distant footsteps of guards returning to their posts inside the palace walls. Inside those walls, King Tristan remained standing in his chamber, staring at nothing now. For the first time since he took the crown, he could not fully silence a thought forming at the edge of his mind. What if she had not been lying? He exhaled slowly, as if rejecting the question itself. But it did not leave him. It stayed. The palace tried to erase Amelia Rowan, but the kingdom refused to forget her. Within days, her name spread beyond the palace walls like fire moving through dry fields. In the taverns near the harbor, men laughed over cheap beer while repeating fragments of what they had heard, twisting them further each time. In the noble estates, servants whispered while polishing silver plates, careful not to be overheard by their masters. Even in the crowded marketplace, where fishmongers shouted and spices filled the air, conversations paused whenever her name was mentioned, as if it carried something dangerous in it. She tried to trap the king. She wanted a crown through a child. She disgraced the royal name. The words grew heavier each time they were spoken, no longer rumors, but accepted truth. No one spoke of how her voice had cracked when she was dragged through the marble hallways, or how her hands had reached out helplessly as the guards pulled her away. Those details disappeared quickly, buried under louder accusations. Inside the palace, silence was carefully constructed. King Tristan issued no public statement. He did not need to. Orders were passed through officials, and records were sealed away in locked cabinets. Any servant who mentioned Emilia's name in conversation was reassigned without warning. The palace itself began to feel like a place built around avoidance. Lady Arabella Crown moved through it all with composed elegance. She sat beside the king during council meetings, her presence calm and reassuring, her voice soft whenever the topic drifted near discomfort. Each time Emilia was mentioned, she would gently redirect the conversation, planting subtle doubt without ever raising suspicion. To those watching, she appeared supportive. To those listening carefully, she was guiding perception. Tristan said little in return. He signed documents, reviewed reports, and approved decisions with steady precision. Yet something in him had shifted. The warmth that once existed in rare private moments had been replaced by controlled distance. Even when he was alone, he avoided lingering thoughts. Instead, he filled his days with structure, as if discipline could silence memory. Emilia Rowan had been alone long before the palace destroyed her. She was orphaned as a little girl after sickness swept through the poor district where her family once lived. With no relatives willing to claim her, she survived by moving from one servant house to another, learning early that kindness in the world rarely lasted. The royal palace had become the only place she had ever called home, even if she was never truly welcomed there. And now, after being cast out by the king himself, she had nowhere left to return to. Far from the palace, Emilia Rowan opened her eyes beneath a damaged wooden roof held together by uneven beams and cloth tied in place to block wind. The shelter was small and unstable, built on the edge of a forgotten path where travelers rarely stopped. The ground beneath her was uneven, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and smoke from distant cooking fires. Her body ached from exhaustion. Hunger was no longer sharp, it had become constant background discomfort. She pressed a hand to her stomach often without thinking, as if instinct alone kept her grounded. When she first tried to find work again, she went to places that once would have welcomed anyone willing to labor. A laundry house near the river turned her away without explanation after one glance. A merchant refused her before she even spoke. Another woman simply shook her head and said nothing, avoiding eye contact as if silence was safer than words. Each rejection layered itself quietly inside her until emotion no longer arrived in waves. It faded into something flatter, heavier. One evening, after returning from another failed attempt, she sat outside the shelter watching smoke rise from distant chimneys. The city beyond looked alive from afar, but none of it belonged to her anymore. Her eyes stung, but no tears came. Something inside her had reached its limit and stopped responding. The world had not changed for her, so she changed instead. She stopped crying, not because she was strong, but because grief no longer brought relief, it only slowed her down. And in a place where survival depended on movement, even sadness became a burden she could not afford. That night, as wind pressed through the broken shelter and distant footsteps passed along the road, Emilia pulled her torn shawl tighter around herself. Her breathing steadied in a new rhythm, quieter than before. Not hope, not surrender, something colder forming beneath both. A decision made without words. She would survive. Emilia Rowan disappeared so completely that even the palace records stopped carrying her name. In the weeks that followed her banishment, she stopped introducing herself to people. Names created attention, and attention created questions. Questions were dangerous. She became another quiet woman moving through crowded streets with lowered eyes and worn clothing, someone easily forgotten the moment she passed by. Survival changed her routines first. At dawn, she walked to the river district where washerwomen gathered beside long wooden platforms soaked with soap and dirty water. The work bent her back for hours at a time. Her fingers became raw from scrubbing heavy fabrics belonging to wealthy families who never looked directly at her. The cold water stung her skin until her hands stayed red long after sunset. Some days she carried baskets for market traders instead. The market near the southern gate remained crowded from morning until evening, filled with the smell of smoked meat, crushed herbs, horse sweat, and fresh bread cooling on open shelves. Merchants shouted over each other, while carts rolled through narrow paths lined with vegetables and hanging fabrics from distant regions. Amelia moved silently through all of it. People remembered faces when they smiled or argued. She did neither. At night, she slept wherever exhaustion defeated fear first. Once inside an abandoned storage shed behind a butcher's stall. Another night beneath the stairs of a crowded boarding house where travelers drank until morning. Sometimes she stayed beneath old fishing nets near the docks, wrapped tightly in a torn blanket that barely protected her from the cold. Pregnancy made every task harder with each passing month. There were mornings she woke already tired. Her back hurt constantly now, and hunger returned faster than she could satisfy it. A single bowl of thin vegetable stew often became her only meal for an entire day. Still, she forced herself to continue because stopping frightened her more than pain. Every rejection slowly reshaped her. At first, she still asked politely for work. Later, she simply stood silently, waiting to see whether someone would point toward a task or wave her away. Most waved her away. She stopped expecting kindness. Then one evening, after carrying sacks of grain across the market for almost no pay, Amelia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The streets blurred around her. She tried reaching the side wall of a nearby building before collapsing, but her knees gave out first. She fell outside a small bakery tucked between two crowded shops near the edge of the lower district. The smell of warm bread drifted through the open window beside her. Fresh rolls cooled on wooden trays inside, while soft yellow light spilled across the cobblestone street. Amelia barely remembered hitting the ground. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying beneath thick blankets near a fireplace. The room was small but warm. Shelves lined the walls, carrying jars of flour, dried herbs, and neatly folded cloth. A pot of soup simmered slowly above the fire, filling the room with the scent of onions and garlic. An older woman sat nearby, peeling potatoes into a bowl, resting on her lap. "You finally woke up," she said calmly. Amelia pushed herself up weakly. Panic flickered across her face immediately. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" "Hush," the woman interrupted gently. "You fainted outside my bakery, that's all." Amelia looked down at the blankets covering her and swallowed hard. "Why are you helping me?" The woman shrugged lightly. "Because you looked hungry." That answer nearly broke her. No suspicion, no cruelty, no questions about the palace scandal that had spread through the kingdom. Just food, just warmth. The woman introduced herself as Martha. She lived alone above the bakery after losing her husband years earlier. She never pushed Amelia to explain her past. In return, Amelia helped clean the kitchen, knead dough in the mornings, and carry baskets downstairs before customers arrived. For the first time since leaving the palace, her days became quieter. Not easy, but bearable. Months later, on a still night deep into winter, the pains began. Martha guided Amelia upstairs to the small bedroom beneath the slanted roof as snow settled silently outside the windows. No doctors came. No palace servants waited nearby with hot water or fine linen. Only Martha's trembling hands and Amelia's determination filled the room. The labor lasted through the night. By dawn, exhaustion had hollowed her completely. Her hair clung to her face, her body shook uncontrollably, and tears mixed with sweat against her skin. Then she heard the first cry, sharp, small, alive. A second cry followed moments later. Martha carefully placed the babies beside her, beneath worn blankets. Amelia stared at them silently at first, almost unable to breathe. 2 boys, tiny hands, dark hair already visible against soft skin, and when one of them opened his eyes briefly, her chest tightened painfully. They carried Tristan's face, not fully, but enough to remind her of everything she had lost. A tear finally slipped down her cheek as she touched one small hand carefully. Not grief this time, something far stronger, love so overwhelming it frightened her. The palace had thrown her away like she meant nothing, yet here, inside a small room above a bakery, holding 2 fragile lives against her chest, Amelia realized she still had something the kingdom could never take from her: her sons.
Time moved differently inside Evermont Palace. The seasons changed beyond the castle walls, but inside the royal court every day followed the same rigid order. Messengers arrived before sunrise, carrying reports from distant provinces. Military captains filled the council chambers before noon with maps, complaints, and casualty numbers. By evening, long banquet tables were covered in roasted meat, wine, sugared fruits, and polished silver dishes that few people touched for pleasure anymore. Meals had become part of royal routine rather than enjoyment. King Tristan Evermont sat at the center of it all, with growing distance in his eyes. He worked constantly. If rebellions rose near the northern borders, he sent soldiers. If merchants protested taxes, he tightened enforcement. If noble families complained about unrest spreading through villages, he increased military presence in the streets of the capital. The kingdom obeyed him, but it no longer loved him. People had begun speaking more carefully whenever soldiers passed nearby. Taverns lowered their voices when discussing the crown. Traders complained in whispers about rising costs and stricter inspections at city gates. Tristan noticed the unrest. He simply believed control mattered more than affection. Inside the council chamber, enormous maps covered the oak tables beneath candlelight. Colored markings showed troop movement across the kingdom, while generals argued over supply routes and security measures. Tristan listened with cold patience, making decisions quickly and without hesitation. Lady Arabella Crown remained beside him through nearly every meeting. Elegant and composed, she blended naturally into palace authority now. She spoke calmly when discussions became tense, often steering conversations towards stability, alliances, and the importance of royal image. "The kingdom needs certainty," she said one evening during supper, while servants poured dark red wine into crystal glasses. Several council members quietly agreed. A queen was needed. An heir was needed. The pressure grew stronger each month. Tristan rarely responded directly during those conversations, but he stopped rejecting the idea entirely. That alone encouraged Arabella. Slowly, carefully, she positioned herself closer to the throne, without ever appearing forceful. Meanwhile, Amelia Rowan's name disappeared from official palace discussion completely. Servants who once worked near her were reassigned quietly. Written records surrounding the banquet scandal became restricted. Even guards involved that night were transferred away from central duty. The palace treated her existence like an embarrassing stain scrubbed from expensive fabric. Yet silence never stayed perfect for long. Lord Matthias Grey noticed the inconsistencies first. As royal advisor, he reviewed records often, and small details began troubling him. Dates no longer matched. Certain witness reports had vanished entirely. One servant assigned to corridor duty the night of Amelia's removal had disappeared from palace employment without explanation. At first, Matthias believed it was administrative disorder. Then he realized someone had deliberately altered the trail. One afternoon, he brought the matter privately to Tristan's study. The king stood near the fireplace reading military correspondence, while untouched food cooled nearby on a silver tray.
There are irregularities in the archive records, Matthias said carefully. Tristan did not look up immediately. What kind of irregularities? Documents connected to the former maid. The room became
Perhaps,
still.
but official testimony
Tristan
appears
finally lowered
incomplete.
the letter in his hand. That matter is closed.
You are wasting time
Matthias
searching
hesitated.
through buried gossip. It may not be gossip.
The king's expression hardened instantly.
I said it is closed.
The king's voice turned sharp enough to cut through the room. Silence followed. Matthias understood the warning clearly. Tristan did not want truth. He wanted order. But even inside the heavily guarded walls of Evermont Palace, control had already begun slipping through his hands long before he realized it.
2 years passed before Amelia Roan returned to the capital she once swore never to see again. The journey back felt heavier than the one that had taken her away. She traveled with the twins beside her in the back of a crowded merchant wagon, carrying sacks of grain, barrels of oil, and crates of dried fish toward the city gates. The road into Evermont was lined with guards, traveling traders, and laborers pushing handcarts through the morning dust. Henry and Theodore sat close beside her, beneath a wool blanket too thin for the cold air. At 2 years old, they had already learned silence from watching their mother. Their dark hair curled slightly beneath their small caps, and their curious eyes moved constantly across the unfamiliar city surrounding them. Amelia kept her hood low the moment the palace towers appeared in the distance. The capital had not changed much. Large stone buildings crowded the streets, while banners carrying the royal crest hung from balconies and archways. The smell of roasting chestnuts, baked bread, horse manure, and smoke blended into the familiar scent of the city she once knew too well. She had only returned because Martha was dying. The old woman had grown weaker during the winter, coughing through the nights until even breathing exhausted her. The village healer finally admitted there was little more he could do. A specific medicine existed in the capital, expensive and difficult to find, but it was Martha's only chance. So Amelia came back, despite the risk, not for herself, for the woman who saved her life. She moved carefully through the marketplace, holding Theodore's hand, while Henry stayed close beside her. The market was crowded with people shouting prices across wooden stalls, stacked with fruit, smoked meat, fabrics, fresh bread, and pottery imported from neighboring kingdoms. Vendors argued loudly, while customers pushed through narrow paths between overflowing tables. Chickens squawked from wicker cages nearby the butcher's stalls, and the smell of warm pastries drifted from nearby ovens. Amelia avoided eye contact with everyone. Her heart tightened each time she saw royal soldiers moving through the streets. She did not belong here anymore. Theodore whispered softly, pointing toward a tray of honey cakes. "Can we have one?" Amelia managed a small smile despite her tension. "Later." They stopped near a medicine cellar, arranging bottles filled with crushed herbs and cloudy liquids across a wooden table. Amelia reached carefully into the small cloth purse hidden beneath her shawl, counting coins slowly. It was barely enough. Then chaos erupted beside them. A heavily loaded produce cart struck the corner of a fruit stall too sharply when turning through the crowded path. The wooden support snapped loudly. Crates tipped sideways instantly, sending apples, pears, and oranges crashing across the stones. People jumped back, shouting in irritation as fruit rolled through the marketplace. Your Theodore startled and let go of Amelia's hand. Before she could catch him, Henry rushed after his brother instinctively. Their caps slipped loose as they moved through the confusion, revealing dark hair beneath the sunlight. A woman nearby froze first, then another. The noise of the marketplace shifted strangely as eyes began turning toward the boys one after another. "They look like the king," whispered someone. "No, that is impossible. Those children." Amelia's blood turned cold. She grabbed both twins immediately, trying to pull them close again, but the damage was already done. People stared openly now.
The resemblance was undeniable once seen properly. The sharp jawline, the dark hair, the unmistakable blue eyes carried by generations of Evermont rulers. Whispers spread faster than movement itself. At the far edge of the marketplace, a royal carriage had stopped to allow passing crowds to clear the road. Soldiers stood nearby holding formation, while citizens bowed respectfully. Then the carriage door opened. Tristan Evermont stepped down onto the street. He looked older than Amelia remembered, harder around the eyes. The weight of rule had settled visibly into his face over the years. At first his attention moved toward the commotion without interest. Then he saw the boys. Everything inside him stopped. The marketplace noise faded into distant blur as his eyes locked onto the children standing beside Amelia Rowan. Alive, real, not memory, not imagination. His breath caught painfully in his chest because denial could no longer survive what stood before him.
King Tristan did not speak publicly about what happened in the marketplace. No royal announcement followed, no explanation was given to the court or the kingdom. By the next morning, the palace carried on as though nothing unusual had happened, but the silence surrounding the king felt different now, tighter, more fragile. Inside his private study, sleep became difficult. Each night, Tristan sat alone beside the dying fire, untouched meals cooling on silver trays, while documents remained open across his desk. Reports from military commanders, tax disputes from southern provinces, and trade requests from neighboring kingdoms all waited for his attention. Yet his mind drifted elsewhere repeatedly. To the twins. He remembered the exact shade of their eyes, the older boy's guarded expression, the younger one gripping Amelia's hand. Sometimes he saw them so clearly that he stopped hearing the voices around him entirely. Lord Matthias Bray noticed it first. During council meetings, Tristan no longer responded immediately when spoken to. He stared too long at empty spaces. Questions had to be repeated. Even Arabella's carefully timed remarks failed to hold his focus the way they once had. One evening after the council dispersed, Matthias entered the king's study carrying several thin folders tied with faded ribbon. He said quietly. Tristan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion visible beneath his eyes. And Matthias placed the documents carefully onto the desk. Several payment records were hidden inside the treasury logs. Money was transferred repeatedly to palace servants after the night Amelia Rowan was removed. Tristan's gaze sharpened slowly. By whom? Matthias hesitated only briefly. Lady Arabella's personal accounts. The room fell silent except for the crackling fire. Tristan opened the records himself. Dates, signatures, reassigned duties, dismissed servants, small details that meant little separately now formed something impossible to ignore together. Witnesses had vanished from palace employment within days of Amelia's banishment. A physician attached to the royal household received unexplained payments shortly afterward. Statements had been altered, not naturally, deliberately. Tristan stared at the papers for a long time without speaking. The deeper Matthias investigated, the clearer the truth became. Amelia had not been exposed publicly because evidence condemned her. She had been silenced before evidence could exist. For the first time in years, Tristan felt uncertainty shifting into something heavier. Guilt. Meanwhile, Lady Arabella Crown sensed the distance growing between them. At dinner, she filled the silence herself, discussing noble alliances, while servants carried roasted duck, buttered potatoes, and wine between courses. Her voice remained calm, but beneath the calmness was urgency. The council grows impatient, she told him carefully. The kingdom needs reassurance after the marketplace rumors. Tristan barely touched his food. Arabella studied him closely before continuing. A formal engagement announcement would silence uncertainty. Still, he gave no answer.
That unsettled her more than anger would have. In the past, Tristan dismissed discomfort with cold certainty. Now he simply drifted somewhere she could not reach. Because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Amelia standing in the marketplace, holding the boys close to her sides. And every time he remembered them, his confidence cracked further. Arabella began understanding something dangerous. The king was starting to doubt himself. Fear settled inside her slowly after that realization. Not fear of scandal, fear of losing everything she had spent years building. Late one night, while the palace slept, Arabella sat alone in her private chamber, lit only by candlelight. A servant waited nervously near the door, while she wrote instructions onto folded parchment with controlled, elegant handwriting. When she finished, she sealed the letter with wax and handed it over without hesitation. "Deliver it quietly," she said. The servant swallowed hard. "My lady, are you certain?" Arabella's expression did not change. They should never have returned to the capital. The servant lowered his head and left, and somewhere beyond the palace walls, danger began moving toward Amelia Rowan and her children. Not by the king's command, but by fear desperate to protect itself. The attack began long after midnight. Amelia woke to the sound of hurried footsteps outside Martha's bakery apartment. At first, she thought it was another drunken fight spilling through the lower district streets, but then came the sharp crack of wood breaking downstairs. Her eyes flew open instantly. The room was dark, except for weak firelight glowing from dying coals near the stove. Beside her, Henry and Theodore slept beneath thick blankets, their breathing soft and uneven. Another crash shook the building. Martha struggled upright from her chair near the fireplace, panic already spreading across her tired face. "Someone's inside," she whispered. Before Amelia could move, heavy boots pounded across the bakery below. Shelves shattered, glass broke against the floor. The twins awoke immediately. "Mama!" Theodore whispered fearfully. Amelia rushed to them, pulling both boys close against her chest as another violent bang echoed from downstairs. Smoke drifted upward through the floorboards seconds later. They had set the bakery on fire. Martha covered her mouth in horror. The staircase door burst open downstairs with enough force to rattle the walls. Men's voices followed, rough and urgent. "Find the woman!" Amelia's blood turned cold. This was no robbery. Someone had come for them specifically. Henry began crying quietly, while Theodore clung tightly to Amelia's arm. She grabbed blankets around the boys and looked desperately toward the single back window facing the narrow alley behind the bakery. The flames downstairs spread quickly now. Heat crawled upward through the small apartment, while smoke thickened near the ceiling. "Martha, help me," Amelia said breathlessly. The older woman hurried toward the window despite her weak condition. Together, they forced it open against the cold night air just as heavy footsteps reached the staircase outside the room. The door shook violently. Again, then again. Amelia lifted Theodore through the opening first into the alley below before helping Henry climb after him. Martha coughed hard behind them as smoke filled the room thicker now. The door splintered inward. Two masked attackers rushed inside. One grabbed Martha immediately, while the other lunged toward Amelia. She fought wildly, reaching for anything near her hands. A ceramic bowl struck the attacker's shoulder hard enough to stagger him briefly. "Mama!" Henry screamed from outside. The sound sharpened something desperate inside her. Amelia shoved the man backward and climbed through the window just as flames burst across part of the ceiling behind her. Outside, the alley was chaos. The twins cried against the freezing wind while smoke poured upward into the night sky. Nearby residents shouted from windows as people gathered toward the burning bakery. Then came the sound of horses, fast. Armored riders stormed into the street at full speed, forcing the growing crowd backward. At their front rode King Tristan Evermont himself. The moment he saw the fire, his expression changed completely. Not royal composure, not controlled authority. Fear. Real fear. He unmounted before his horse fully stopped moving and pushed through the smoke toward the alley. Soldiers rushed after him, swords already drawn as masked attackers attempting escaping through the street. Steel clashed instantly. For the first time in years, Tristan fought without restraint. He struck one attacker hard enough to send him crashing across the stones before turning on another trying to reach Amelia. Nothing about him looked regal anymore, only furious. The surviving attackers were quickly overwhelmed by royal guards, dragged bleeding into the street beneath torchlight and shouting crowds. Amelia held the twins tightly near the alley wall, cuffing from smoke, while Tristan approached them slowly. His coat was stained with ash, and blood marked one sleeve where a blade had grazed him during the fight. He looked directly at the boys first, as if confirming they were alive, then at Amelia. Before either could speak, one captured attacker shouted desperately, while soldiers forced him to the ground. "We were paid." Tristan turned sharply. By who? The man hesitated only briefly before fear overcame loyalty. "Lady Arabella!" The street fell silent, except for the crackling fire behind them. Amelia stared in shock, while Tristan stood completely motionless. For a second, something inside him seemed to empty out entirely. Not confusion, not disbelief, recognition. As though pieces he refused to connect finally locked together all at once. The hidden records, the altered documents, the pressure to marry quickly, and now this. Arabella had not protected the crown. She had protected herself. The arrests happened before sunrise. Arabella was dragged from her chambers, still wearing a silk nightrobe beneath a heavy fur cloak, while palace servants watched in stunned silence from the corridors. She demanded to see Tristan repeatedly, but he refused her immediately. The trial lasted 3 days, not because evidence was weak, but because there was so much of it. Witnesses came forward one after another. Servants admitted receiving payment for silence. Treasury officials confirmed hidden transfers. The physician who altered records finally confessed publicly under questioning. Each revelation stripped another layer from the carefully constructed image Arabella spent years building. Yet throughout the proceedings, she never looked ashamed, only angry. When the final verdict was delivered, chains were locked around her wrists before the entire royal court. "You ruined yourself for a servant," she spat at Tristan as guards pulled her away. But Tristan no longer looked at her with affection or trust, only exhaustion. Because standing there inside the crowded courtroom, surrounded by exposed lies and broken truths, he finally understood the full cost of his choices. Arabella had manipulated the kingdom, but he had given her the power to do it, and that realization destroyed him far more completely than betrayal ever could. Amelia did not return to Evermont Palace immediately after the trial ended. She stayed instead in a quiet estate house on the edge of the capital, arranged by Lord Matthias, far from crowded streets and royal attention. The house had once belonged to an elderly noblewoman and carried the faded comfort of a place untouched by politics. Lace curtains hung over tall windows, old books filled wooden shelves, and the scent of dried lavender lingered faintly through the halls. For the first time in years, Henry and Theodore slept in warm beds without fear of being forced to leave before morning. Martha stayed there too, though age and illness had weakened her badly. She spent most afternoons near the garden windows, wrapped in blankets, while the twins played nearby with wooden toy soldiers carved by one of the servants. Amelia moved through those days carefully, as though peace itself still felt unfamiliar. Then Tristan came, not with soldiers, not with royal announcements, alone. The servants let him inside reluctantly, while Amelia stood near the dining-room table, arranging bowls of soup for the evening meal. Fresh bread rested nearby, beside roasted vegetables and tea still steaming from silver cups. When she looked up and saw him standing there, her expression did not soften, it tightened. The twins froze immediately. Neither boy moved toward him. Tristan looked different outside the palace. Simpler clothes replaced royal ceremony, though exhaustion still clung heavily to him. There were shadows beneath his eyes that sleep no longer seemed capable of fixing. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Amelia placed the spoon down quietly. "You should not be here." Tristan accepted the words without argument. "I know." Henry stepped closer to Amelia instinctively, while Theodore watched Tristan with cautious curiosity from behind the table. The silence inside the room felt painfully human now, stripped of power and titles. Finally, Tristan spoke again. "You cannot undo what happened," Amelia said before he could continue. Her voice carried no anger anymore, only truth, the kind that remained after grief exhausted itself completely. Tristan lowered his eyes briefly. "I know." And for once he did not try defending himself. No excuses, no explanations, only acceptance. That honesty unsettled Amelia more than denial would have. Over the following weeks, Tristan continued returning quietly. Sometimes he arrived carrying books for the twins, other times sweet pastries from the royal kitchens, or carved animals from palace craftsmen. He never stayed long at first. He simply remained present. The boys reacted differently than Amelia expected. At first, they watched him carefully, trying to understand the strange tension surrounding the man everyone bowed to. Theodore asked questions openly, while Henry remained protective and distant. "Why do people call you king?" Theodore asked one afternoon, sitting cross-legged beside the fireplace, eating slices of buttered bread with berry jam. Tristan sat across from him quietly. "Because the kingdom belongs to my family." Theodore frowned thoughtfully. "Does that mean it belongs to us too?" The question caught Tristan off guard completely. Before he could answer, Henry spoke sharply nearby. "Mama says kingdoms are not important." Amelia looked up from sewing beside the window, surprised by the firmness in his voice. Tristan nodded slowly. "She is right." The answer shifted something small between them. Days turned into weeks, then weeks into months. Tristan never demanded affection from the twins. He did not force authority into their lives or attempt replacing lost time with gifts and promises. He sat with them during meals, read stories beside the fire at night, walked with them through the gardens while Theodore collected flowers and Henry asked guarded questions about horses and swords. Slowly, absence stopped defining him. Presence did. Beyond the estate walls, the kingdom watched the changes carefully. Citizens who once feared Tristan began speaking about him differently after the trial. The image of the cold king had fractured publicly the moment he exposed Arabella instead of protecting the crown from scandal. Then came the day he knelt before Amelia. The courtyard outside Evermont Palace filled with nobles, soldiers, servants, and citizens gathered beneath gray autumn skies. Word spread quickly through the capital that the king intended to address the kingdom personally. Amelia stood facing him in a simple dark gown, while the twins remained beside her, holding hands. No music played, no celebration decorated the palace steps. Only silence waited. Then Tristan Evemont lowered himself to one knee before the entire kingdom. Gasps spread instantly through the crowd. Kings did not kneel. Yet he remained there, looking not at the nobles or ministers surrounding them, but at Amelia alone. Not for image, not for power, but because loss had finally taught him what pride never could. Amelia looked at him for a long time without speaking. This man had broken her life once. That truth would never disappear. But neither would the years she spent surviving alone, or the children standing beside her now because she refused to surrender when the world abandoned her. Revenge would not restore those years. Forgiveness would not erase them either.